Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I need to get a green jacket. I need like Dan Ives. I'm gonna start wearing like really like bright and bold colors to highlight
Oh,
my
I've got
past.
matching shoes on, but then you knew that. So we've got all sorts of stuff going on today. We've got a dollar bounce back, but still very weak. We've got as you pointed out to me earlier, the manufacturing and services PMIs globally. We've got a yield curve that still seems to be behaving, and we're going to talk about all of this. But I think first we're going to go around the world with Arthur.
Yeah. And I'll
I've
start my
actually
segment
seen
by
you do
singing,
that.
"Oh Canada,
Please don't.
don't quit my day job." And I'm sober, which is scary. So we have elections this weekend in Canada. We have our early polling already. Early voting and mail-in ballots are way ahead of the last prior election. So it looks like you've got a lot of civic engagement going on in Canada. So big turnout. And this is a pretty interesting election because prior to current candidate, which is Mark Carney, who formerly headed up the Central Bank of Canada, and then he went over and ran the Bank of England, came back, and he replaced Trudeau as the prime minister candidate for the current election cycle. Carney has a lot more credibility, a lot less baggage, because the interesting thing about this election is it was a 20-point lead for conservatives just a couple months ago. And now if you look at the charts here, the conservatives look like they're polling a little bit under the liberals, and you got a fractured legislature. But the conservatives, which is the blue line, they were blowing out the liberals with Trudeau as the long-term head and prime minister. And now you've seen the complete reversal. So clearly Trudeau, from a baggage standpoint, was really the huge problem for the party, the Liberal Party. Now we're going to see whether or not these actual numbers prove to be true. And then the NDP, by all accounts, is getting wiped out. The NDP was the Democrats, but they're left leaning too. So I hate using the word democratic with what I consider socialists, but we'll stick with their labels. So Canada, big election this weekend. I'm not quite sure what it means for policy outlook, because this guy Carney, I don't believe he really is like Trudeau. I don't think he's like the conservatives for sure, but we'll see what the policy mix looks like going forward.
But are we the only country that doesn't have an election on the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, the European ones, yeah, which is funny because you think they would want more time off. Maybe that's why they have it on weekends, because they have so many more holidays and vacation than Americans do, and we're like,
No, but I
oh,
think it's
looking
kind
to
of
get
nuts
another one.
because you hear about voter suppression because people have to go to work. So, I mean, why wouldn't we just move it to a Saturday?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, well, that's awesome. I'll be hanging by my a thread this weekend to see how this turns out. And then when
And
I
then
do, I'll do an imitation of you in your little spaceship.
I
Um,
think you and I talked about, I'm going to be the straw horse for the Debbie Downer. I'm going to be the Arthur Downer today.
oh, you are? Go for it. Go
I
for
am.
it.
So I'm going to be the dismal economist. Global S&P global PMIs came out, manufacturing came out, the numbers are down. Manufacturing is slightly up, but we're talking barely an expansionary territory. And conversely, housing, new home sales were up, which the South continues to lead new home sales in the U.S. I think mortgage rates creeped up a little bit, but they came down, which is maybe what prompted it. But I think when you look at the totality of the numbers, you look at sentiment, which is still very negative overall. It's the lack of policy clarity. 1 minute we've talked about some prior shows. 1 minute we've got massive tariffs, and there's this like tit for tat, like literally going up by hundreds of percent between U.S. and Canada. They're saying they won't come to the table because Trump's being mean to them or being rude or something like that. I think Monday, Trump was upset at Chairman Powell and said that he's the worst chairman ever. I don't know. Arthur Burns would give him a run for his money. and he's not cutting rates fast enough, and the economy needs lower rates, and he's stupid. Or I mean, like all
No, he
these
called him a
acts.
loser. He called him a
I mean,
loser.
that's right, call him a loser. I mean, this
Yeah.
is like the old Trump, like take away the tweet machine, and then the market completely melts down because replacing a Fed chairman during his term is like unheard of. You're not supposed to do that. You really can't get them out either. They have to voluntarily leave in order to maintain their independence. But 2 days later, he's like, "Oh, I was just joking." This is why you're seeing, in my opinion, this herky jerky kind of real economy. Businesses can't figure out what to do. Consumers can't figure out what to do. Do you buy all the stuff before the tariffs hit from Chinese goods? Do you wait and see if people get a deal? 1 minute there's like 80 countries lined up to try to cut a tariff deal with us. Now it's like 15 or 20. I don't know what the truth is. I don't think anybody really knows what the real numbers are and what this stuff's going to look like, including the administration, because it's kind of one of these things where you got to wait and see who's going to come to the table and what they're negotiating. But
Right.
it's causing fits and starts. It's almost like, remember the old days, Nancy, when you had a choke on a car or like a lawnmower and it would sputter and stuff. That's what I think of. Like, you've got an economy that doesn't know, like, are you hitting the gas? Are you going to stall out? Are we going to go really
Right.
fast? What's going on here?
Right.
Um,
I'm looking at some earnings as they're coming in. So yes, I'm listening 100%,
that's okay.
as I always do when you speak. Yeah,
Hanging on
I think
every word.
we're hearing companies postpone capex. What's interesting is that some companies are still giving guidance. We'll talk about that in the second half, but it is difficult because you don't know. If you just think about Nvidia, they modified their chips to the H20 so that they could meet the Biden administration's criteria to sell to China, and now they're being banned, or we're banning them from an export standpoint under the Trump administration. That's pretty hard to sort of pivot from when you've retooled factories or foundries. And so I think that, to your point, it reminds me of the clutch I had in my 1972 Carmagia, where if you didn't, you could come out of the gate, pretty bumpy, and that's what I'm worried about, or stall out, and that's what we definitely don't want to see for obvious reasons. But
But
yeah,
I think you are going to see new leadership, and I mean that sectoral industry sectors, industries, sub-industries. Anytime you have a major policy change at the federal level, you should see new winners and losers appear. Some parts of the economy are going to do much better than others, and that's kind of always the case. But it's when you get those inflection points that you see the most change, and then the system tries to figure out what's going on and it adapts.
yeah, and it will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
just
going to be interesting to see this. Look at this is not meant to be political per se. You look at foreigner coming across northern and southern borders are down like 99, 98, 97%, right? People illegals trying to come across the border illegally. Sorry. People trying to enter the US without visas. And what's that going to do to agriculture, housing, building starts? Traditionally, those were the areas that you saw the most use of those types of workers. And our last summit, we talked about robotics, and that's a natural. I think this was already coming. It's just accelerated with what's happening.
it's my favorite thing to think about too.
Yeah.
I know for some people it's a little bit like Lost in Space. Remember that old show where
Warning, Will Robinson. Warning.
but I do think there's so many areas where we're going to say how, it's like your iPhone, or in your case, your poor little Samsung. How did we ever do without it? Like I remember I was covering Motorola when they decided to put a camera in the phone, and we were like, what, when am I ever going to use my phone for a camera?
Yeah.
That was the conventional wisdom. And we all carried around those little Nikon ones that you took onto your belt if you were hiking. And, now we don't need a camera. So I do think that we're going to find usages for robots. I had somebody come and do my windows today. I don't have a lot of windows because I've downsized. It was $460. I think a robot could do it a lot cheaper.
Way
So,
faster,
huh? And faster.
faster.
Yeah.
And I
And I
saw
wouldn't
like
have to talk to them.
now I don't know if I'm pronouncing this properly, but Husqvarna, they
Yes.
make chainsaws and blowers. You can buy these robots that'll mow your lawn. And they go out and they cut your lawn and they come back and they recharge. They do it all themselves. You kind of like plot out where you want them to go,
That
and they
is
just go
cool.
do it. And they have
That's
sensors and they
cool.
know how to hide a cut it. And it tells you if it's broken. My good friend Mike Ripito, Bill buys a lot of these huge construction equipment, and he said he has this giant John Deere thing, and he says he's getting a text message that they've already shipped him the new part before he even knows the thing's not working properly. Like the tractor tells John Deere ships the part under a maintenance contract, and then they say, "Oh, by the way, your
So one
tractor
of
needs
our
this new part, and it's here."
we don't own it, but that is one of my favorite old economy companies that is embracing all the new technologies because they also have this pinpointed planting where they can just go into a single hole very precisely and move on. So the planting becomes that much more efficient. But okay, well, so we're gonna take a quick break and then we're gonna come back and talk about earnings and company stocks or some specific stocks that reported today after the close. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be back. Why is it funny? It's like a
Why didn't
whoopee
you get the better
cushion.
animation? Why? I mean, did you tell them that you wanted to launch me into space, and that's why I got in the rocket ship?
I said Alice to the moon. Oh boy, there's a timestamp. So listen, I just wanted to talk a little bit about earnings because one of the expectations is that has been that the first quarter would be pretty grim and that companies would not give guidance. And I think for the most part that makes sense. Why would you give guidance if you don't have to in this environment? And you got the perfect excuse, which is I don't know. I don't know what the tariffs are going to be. But in fact, what we've seen is this is a number through Friday, but 33 companies have reported, and of those 33 companies, 71% have beat on earnings, which is about in line with normal. It's usually around 75 to 78%. Now, it does beg the question: why are Wall Street analysts always so wrong? To the tune of 2/3 of companies surprised to the upside, pretty much every quarter. But that number is much higher than I would have expected. Now we're early in the season, but today we got ServiceNow, and that chart is up, and you can see that that is at the close. But in the aftermarket trading, I'm pulling that up. The stock is 10%, yeah. But I'm looking at, is that reflected in your numbers? Yes, it is. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Oh, dear producer. And so that's a big move. I mean, the stock has sold off on expectations that they would see a slowdown, but they beat on earnings, they beat on revenues, and they raised guidance. And one of the drivers in their guidance is government contracts. I don't know. I thought Doge was cutting those out, but that's not the ServiceNow experience. We own that in our 12 best ideas portfolios and in the growth strategy. We've owned it for a long time. We've made a lot of money, excellent CEO. But this is a company that is conducting traffic on the cloud and AI computing. So great name, good delivery this quarter. I think that's going to set the tone for the tech names that report. We get Google later this week, and then we get the big names next week. So that's very encouraging, especially because we shifted our focus, our AI focus, to software from hardware. I mean, we didn't sell out of the names, but we shifted the overweights to software about 9 months ago now. So anyway, so that's that. And then Chipotle reported, and that's another member of the 12 Best Ideas portfolio. They disappointed, and the stock is down a couple percent, but it's been down. And this is one of those um, situations. The CEO left and went to
Starbucks.
Starbucks, thank you. And the stock there immediately went up 25%. And then we've had the recent tariff issues, and so the stocks come back down. But the narrative was that Chipotle, the management team had, sort of grown up under Brian Nichols, who is now at Starbucks, and that they would continue to execute. And I think for the most part that's going to be true, but demand has slowed. They announced yesterday or the day before that they were expanding into Mexico, which the timing doesn't seem really good to me, given the whole tariff situation. But we still think the name is one that you want to own for the long term, and so we've maintained our positions in it. But they've just seen, the headlines are spending slowdown broad across income geography. So both high net worth and less net worth people, and then across geographies. So we'll stay tuned and keep you posted on it. But that was another one. And then the big bazooka was last night, and that was Tesla. Our friend Dan Ives, who you want to emulate as a fashion icon, Dan has a pretty tight pulse on the board, and he's been calling for Elon Musk to step away from Doge. He's been writing about it. He lowered his price target. He bullied him into announcing last night that he's going to pull away from Doge and really redirect his focus on Tesla, which I think is a good thing for the stock. And you can see it's had a nice couple of days as investors kind of, rethink, okay, what are we paying attention to at this company? And the EV sales, the earnings report was atrocious. The stock traded up on the news that he's going to refocus. I got a call from a Bloomberg reporter as I was driving in. Her only beat is Tesla this morning. And Arthur knows why that's funny, because I drive about a mile to work. But she was asking me, what we thought, and would the brand ever repair? And I said, listen, Republicans are drinking Budweiser again. So eventually people forget about this stuff and they move on and go back to the brands that they've known and loved. So stay tuned. I think we'll continue to, see improvements in deliveries at Tesla, but we'll see. In the meantime, the market really liked the news. So that was that.
And they're the 800-pound gorilla. So even though sales are down, this is the largest EV manufacturer and sales organization in the world, right?
Mhm. They have the top selling model in the Model Y.
Yeah.
Of cars globally. So they've been losing ground to Baidu. And I guess some domestic providers.
They're cheaper than anyone I've seen out there. I mean, it's ridiculous. You and I talked about that on the previous show. You said you want a red one, right?
No, I want the matte black.
I do. Okay.
But in order to have one, you've got to have a garage, and I don't have a garage right now. So there's nowhere to plug it in. I guess I could take a line out the front door and plug it in the house. Anyway, yeah. So I think it would complement my F-150 pretty nicely. Yeah, and then
you should ride a horse to work. Actually, is what I think you should do. But
they do here sometimes. I just like doing that. Yeah, I've seen it. So anyway, the only other thing that I wanted to talk about today was share buybacks. We've been talking about that for a long time. I just published in today's research bulletin a piece that, the window is closed right now for share buybacks. So one of the things that we have argued is that buybacks, whether you like them or not, and I could make an argument on both sides, but that they provide a floor for stock prices. And this chart shows the S&P 500 index in blue, and that's my toddler-like circle or whatever it is. that shows like the S&P has declined much more dramatically than the buyback index. And the buyback index is down only 5% this year. And I think as the window reopens, you'll start to see companies go in and buy their shares back. And what's so curious about this, Brian Reynolds, who's really the expert on this whole shadow banking world that we occupy with real banking, but these are the pension plans, the public pension plans and insurance companies that seem to have an insatiable appetite for corporate bonds. So they, even like in many of the public pension plans, they are grossly underweight equities. They're way overweight in terms of fixed income and particularly corporate bonds. And then they have leveraged bond portfolios as well. So that's their way of managing risk. I disagree with it, but that's how they do it. So the companies have, they have a ready buyer whenever they want to issue bonds. And in doing so, what happens is they use the money for capex and they use the money to buy back their shares. And the treasurers get incented to bottom tick the stock names, and it's usually on a VWAP basis, so a average, if you will. And that's their job, is to go in and buy the stock, and their bonus is based on how well they do in the market. So I think we're going to see that buyer come back into the market soon again, and you can see the evidence that what we've been advocating is in fact true, as measured by Bloomberg. So that's a bit of good news that we continue to hang our hat on. And then lastly, I'll just talk briefly about the 60/40 portfolio. It hasn't worked. What we've had is an environment where stocks are selling off and bonds are selling off, and that happened. I don't know if it was the year before last. I think it was in 2022, maybe. And so I think as investors rethink risk, and we have this conversation with our clients all the time, sometimes you're attempting to reduce risk and you're actually increasing risk. So we're going to do some more work on this and publish something. But our bond portfolios have held up very well, and that's thanks to Byron, who many of you have met on this podcast or live stream. Dating myself, and of course,
the other fixed income money manager.
and of course, Arthur, whose fixed income strategy has a 5-star Morningstar rating. So, and continues to hold up quite nicely in this environment. So, anyway, that was it. That's all I have for today. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, one of the things that when I think of government policies, and we talk about all the volatility, we're still waiting for the budget bill, by the way, which we haven't seen yet, and that could be big because that's actually continuity of tax cuts, maybe even more tax cuts. That'd be fantastic. And we haven't heard from Lee Zeldin much at EPA. And one of the big killers of an economy is overregulation. So it's going to be very interesting. We've heard from defense, we've heard from every other department, but we haven't really heard much out of Lee Zeldin. I don't know if he's just filling up his quiver and he's going to come out.
Well, they did. They had like 31 regulations that they took off the books right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. Like he probably will have much more to say soon, I hope, because we do need the deregulation for the story as the taxes and the deregulation as an offset to tariffs. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, I know what the president has said, and that is that they're going to pay. They're going to pay for it. But the tariffs are a tax on the U.S. consumer. And so, that's one of the reasons that I think you've seen people pull back on spending, though. Again, another conflicting data point. What we heard from JP Morgan, Bank of America, American Express, and I forget who the other one was, is that the consumer is not only spending, but post Liberation Day, spending went up.
Well,
So I don't know if it was pulled forward.
Nancy, as government starts to really rein in its spending, any places where there's a gap, where there's a vacuum, private markets are going to try to get into that niche if they think they can make money there, whether it's selling to the government at lower cost, like providing a better service than the government was doing by itself, or if the private sector said, hey, I was relying on this government largesse, the spending's gone, I still need the service, like trash and stuff. Look at the number of privatization of trash pickups and recycling. And, we see this at the municipal level, but it's a federal phenomenon too. And as the federal government pulls back, you should expect to see smart companies that can make money and deliver a good service try to get in there and pick up those niche businesses. So
Like SpaceX.
yeah, and robotics and all that stuff. Like you look
Yeah.
at some countries that try to do it themselves. I mean, we talked about Airbus versus Boeing. It's not the greatest example, but Boeing, private company, gets a lot of government contracts. But you look at how inefficient Airbus is. Like you have to negotiate. Italy makes the tail, for the planes, and France makes the left wing, and UK makes the right wing, and Germany makes the nose part. And I mean, because
Folks,
they've all got to
don't repeat
negotiate.
that. It's not true. It's hyperbole, but we get your
Yeah, I'm
point.
joking. Yeah, I am. I'm just making this stuff up as I go along. I don't know who makes what, but I do know it's all over the place because everybody wants their piece of the pie.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Yeah, the private markets will solve the problem.
Yeah.
So I used to, listen, my husband was a little bit older than me, and so he would tell me stuff, and I'd go, "Oh, I didn't know that," particularly as it related to music. And so one day he told me, "You know why Roy Orbison wears sunglasses, right?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "He's blind." So I can't tell you how many people I told that to, and then I found out he wasn't blind. He's just shy.
He's just really
So
cool.
so they don't make the tail in Italy and the right wing in the UK, just for the record. But I get it. I get it. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for
Thank
your
you, everybody.
time. Good to see you.
See you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.